Reaction out from former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. When I last had you here, General, we talked about how these terror cells are everywhere, how they plan and do a lot of things, but we get info on them by snooping on them. And it comes at a time when there are limits to that with the whole dust-up over Apple and its phones, et cetera. How far do we go? What are the limitations there? What do you think?
Well, I think that this is a very difficult question. It's probably one of the most difficult questions in constitutional law. And it shifts, Neil, honestly. I think anyone who says differently, I think, isn't being candid. It depends on the circumstances. That, after 9/11, for example, what was public opinion like? And that was, we want to give the government all the tools they needed to get information, and we're willing to sacrifice a little bit of privacy. And with the passage of time, as the government is successful in protecting America, Americans feel more safe. They want the balance to shift a little bit more towards protection, more privacy, and so it's really going to depend on the circumstances, quite honestly. But at the end of the day, we should expect our government to protect our country, but to do so in a way that is consistent with our constitutional rights of privacy. And I'm hopeful of this administration that that's the standard that they're operating under.
There's so much we don't know at this point about how we tracked down this guy. We did know that Brussels was a breeding ground for this sort of activity. But if it turns out that it was a chatter and noise over phones and the internet, which is typically the case, not always the case, is that a reminder here we should beef up such, follow-through, spying, whatever you want to call it?
Well, it's certainly a reminder that this is a valuable tool and that we need to make sure that the government remains capable of utilizing this tool, because you're right, this is a way that our enemies communicate these days, and it's very, very important that we were able to monitor them when we have reasonable suspicion that, in fact, there is chatter amongst our enemy. But if we're talking about just listening in, from time to time because we feel like it on a whim of the communications of innocent Americans, obviously that's problematic. But again, if we're talking about focusing surveillance on terrorists or known terrorists or potential threats, that's going to be okay.
While I have you, Judge, David Petraeus, the general, is appearing for another closed-door meeting. I think his second on Capitol Hill, detailing this whole Benghazi thing and maybe what was transpired and communicated from offices here to offices there. What do you make of that? Where do you think this is going?
Well, I don't know where it may be going. Why someone may be asked to come back to testify is because now the committee may have additional information. They've developed additional information. They've either uncovered it, they've got additional paperwork or emails, or they have received testimony since General Petraeus' first hearing, and they want to get clarification. They may have additional questions that they didn't ask before because they didn't have this background. And so, again, it's all part of the fact-finding effort by the Congress in trying to fully understand what happened in Benghazi, and I think that's perfectly appropriate.
By the way, General Petraeus will be on Wall Street Week, our brand new show here, 8 p.m. on FBN. But having said that, Judge, I'm wondering, would you ever foresee a situation where the FBI recommends taking action, but the Justice Department refuses? What would be the fallout from a scenario like that?
Well, there may not be any sort of legal fallout in that, the FBI's charge is to simply make a recommendation, look at the evidence and make a recommendation, but it's up to the prosecutor and ultimately the Attorney General to make the decision as to whether or not that there is a case that can be, it can be successfully prosecuted in our courts. Now, for the Attorney General to ignore or override the recommendation of the FBI, I think carries significant political risk for the Attorney General and for the White House, quite honestly, because invariably, I think this is a kind of issue that while the White House may not be involved in making the decision, I think the White House will make its views known to the Department of Justice about the preliminary decision by the Attorney General, and so great political risk here, and so I would really question whether or not that's a realistic scenario, quite honestly, because of what is at stake with respect to that decision and ignoring, overriding that decision by the FBI. And,
it would be even more explosive. I hear you.
Particularly during a political season. It's just, it's not something that I think is very likely.
Yeah, I think they say not productive, right, Judge? Thank you very, very much. Very good seeing you again.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.